That Crimez. That That Crimez. That Crimez.
Do.
That Crimez. That Crimez.
This is 1984.
That Crimez.
Hey, my nigga, I ain't hating.
slave. So why you tryna give me occupation? My nigga, I ain't hate, nah. And my nigga, I ain't lazy. I know homies is some cold-blooded killers, rapists and thieves. So why should I be patient? I said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime. Hey, my nigga, I ain't hating, and my nigga, I ain't lazy. But I know everything that they got come from slaves. So why you tryna give me occupation? My nigga, I ain't hate, nah. And my nigga, I ain't lazy. But I know homies is some cold-blooded killers, rapists and thieves. So why should I be patient? I feel like Babylon and Generation D8 with clean sense, uncommon, can you see straight? Freeze frames by the block in the deep state, deep fake DNA. I'm mobbing with the think tank. On the block with the guards where the beats done. What makes it loud for a law, get your beat stung. Freeze frame, make it hard for bombers roll through. That hating energy get barbecue beef bump. You work a third of the day to get the shame. Yeah, we got just like the murderers and rapists that you claim that you climb. So we burn a little sage, then we raid in your spot.
Get down, nigga, get your motherfucking ass down. What that motherfucking dope at? Fuck, nigga.
Pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime. Hey, my nigga, I ain't hating, and my nigga, I ain't lazy. But I know everything that they got come from slaves. So why you tryna give me occupation? My nigga, I ain't hate, nah. And my nigga, I ain't lazy. But I know homies is some cold-blooded killers, rapists and thieves. So why should I be patient?
I said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Said he pull crime, cold crime, cold crime, slow crime, slow crime, cold crime, cold crime. Hey, my nigga, I ain't hating. My nigga, I ain't lazy. But I know everything that they got come from slaves. So why you tryna give me occupation? My nigga, I ain't hating, nah. And my nigga, I ain't lazy. But I know homies is some cold-blooded killers, rapists and thieves. So why should I be patient?
Warning. The Federal Communications Commission has determined the following content to be emotionally harmful. Snowflakes should not view this content under any circumstances, even if supervised by a G.I. Joe, Navy SEALs, Army vet, or someone with good common sense. The views and opinions expressed, including the depictions of persons of color, corrupt politicians, white people with or without a tan, haters, who have yet to brush their teeth typing angrily in the comment section with hot breath syndrome, do not reflect any official policy or position of the U.S. government. This program contains graphic language, dark comedy, unique intelligence, creativity, a high credit score, and high blood pressure when triggered. This program has also been accused of racism, violence, misogyny, mansogyny, feminism, Nitaoism, defacement of celebrities, and of course, being a bully.
This some 1984.
Welcome to Thought Crimes.
The point is, I joke about racism, because racism is a joke.
You know something? At least he's honest.
Ladies and gentlemen.
He's a goddamn weapon.
Can you hear me in the back?
Blackness.
Sincere.
I'm so sincere.
S-I-N-E-C-E-R-E, sincere.
I mean, the problem is really with the people you cover. Politicians, the celebrities.
Nobody does it better.
The cream of the crop.
Welcome to Thought Crimes, everyone, and this is your girl, Sincere.
And this is your man, Prince Solomon.
So, we are talking about 23andMe. Basically, they have sold the rights to develop a drug based on its users. Basically, for those who don't know, the DNA that they have been able to collect through their 23andMe kit has now helped them to be able to allegedly develop a drug based again on their users' information when they, gave their DNA over to 23andMe with the mouth swaps. Or actually, 23andMe don't do the mouth swaps; they do the spitting in the tube. So that's their process of collecting DNA.
Yeah, I've seen some very, for me personally, disgusting instructional videos of the spit in the valve. I don't like that. I'm sorry, don't like loogies. But anyway, yes, indeed. 23andMe actually has done something that appears to be unprecedented for a lot of people. When folks found out 23andMe sold the rights to a drug it developed from its genetic database. Think about that. It was able to sell a drug that was in a development phase as they were advertising with this, I would say more so even than Ancestry.com. I would actually say it was a pretty aggressive social media ad campaign.
Well, they had to partner up with that company Almirall, which is a
Spanish-based, right?
Yeah, pharmaceutical company based in Spain, and it's supposed to be a partnership that is supposed to have treatment, for inflammatory diseases and arthritis, to fight against arthritis. But even though 99% of technology is created from the origin source to help people, we know a lot of times that it's eventually turned into something that is used for nefarious reasons, which is why there are certain people that are apprehensive, while there are other ones saying as long as they don't turn over everything to the feds, and the federal government is now using this to monitor people, then what's the issue if they're using this science for medical purposes?
I do get that part. I get it. And I mean, we are in the era of data mining, so you and I, we was watching on Frontline, the excellent documentary about AI, and its, use with life and how there's going to be conflicts, this, that, and third. I mean, you guys know about the AI discussion, to the listeners that understand. But one of the key advisors in the, filming itself, he made a very bold statement that stuck with me. He said data is the new oil. And data is not only just, mining details about like social media, this, that, and third, but we're also talking about genetic data, Sam, which is what we're speaking to when it comes to 23andMe. And think about it like this. You and I, we talked about it, and we talked about on our live streams about how when you're filling out a job application, and people were finding out a little bit later that, you fill out a job application, all of a sudden you start getting advertisements from Home Depot, you start getting, advertisement from the Gap, this, that, and third, and you're finding out that even some of these places that you're seeking gainful employment, they also have contracts where they've sold your data off to advertising agencies, and they get kind of like a kickback. And it's kind of like the reality of the situation of it, to be honest with you. Some of the advertising is useful. I mean, I know like when I'm on Instagram, and let's say, because our data is being mined on Instagram, but let's say, they have some type of, pin display, or some new animation program that they're following the algorithmic pattern of, how Sin and I are trekking online. That's a part of data mining as well. Some of it is useful when they're advertising to you about, things that you may be signing up for. And then, on the other side of it, just like you get spam callers in the classic telephones where people, yo, hello, how you doing? We're selling books and this, that, you're going to get that unwanted advertising as well, things that you weren't really interested, but they somehow was able to get your data digitally. So I think all of this, strangely enough, it's kind of under the same umbrella.
Right. I mean, you have some companies where it's done automatically.
Right.
Then some are still in the, I guess, the respectful courting area or days where they ask you, they say, well, if you press OK on this, that means you will allow us to harvest your data to better serve you. It's like with Patreon. Patreon, they ask the people who are users, who are creators, and those who go to Patreon to support creators, if this is okay if we do this. Now, you don't actually have to comply. You could press exit and keep doing your thing. But again, there's other companies where they just automatically take it. And here's the thing that people have to understand. Almost everything you saw on Black Mirror is true, whether we're talking about even the data harvesting. And data harvesting also includes bio. It also includes people's DNA. I mean, that is actually a part of the data collecting system. And this is something China is confident in. They are betting that even though the United States is still far ahead with technology and the tech giants, they personally feel that they can surpass the United States pertaining to business competition and pertaining to data collection, because they have 1 billion people over in China, and they've already implemented systems in China and in other, surrounding areas where they've already integrated the public to people who have bad credit. It's already a facial recognition. Social media and certain apps already being used for certain people to get better privileges. All these things we saw on Black Mirror a couple of years ago, and even before Black Mirror, if you go back to the 80s and even before the .com crash and all that, with some people would call them the origin tech gods and geniuses. Even back then, you had books and professors that talked about this type of technology already being developed. It's just that in the United States, they're not as, they're not moving as quickly as China in introducing these type of technology to the American public, even though for right now they are still ahead of China.
Yeah, I think what we're really seeing is we're really starting to see kind of the end result of what many futurists, what many scientific think tanks have been dealing with for the better part of the earlier millennium. And even like you said, with even science fiction, people forget that science fiction, you have, it's beautiful as many of the expansive ideas creatively that you find in science fiction. There's also an aspect of predictive programming that goes on within science fiction as well. I think that's why, like, when people kind of go back and they do a double take to William Shatner's hokey Star Trek, even though I thought it was a really good show, but you see some of the technology that they were using. And in fact, many of some of our, more brilliant scientific minds today, if you see them routinely referencing first Star Trek and then maybe secondary, they'll reference a Star Wars or, anything dealing with Isaac Asimov or Gene Roddenberry. And those guys in themselves, they were futurists. They were, fascinated what was to come. So I think it's funny for some people. I think there's a fear aspect of it because it is something new. But secondly, I think science fiction has done a great job of, in many cases, kind of horrifying some of the new technology that was supposed to come on the rise. But I even think with this one here, for me, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know, maybe for you, but I think my issue maybe is, regulations. How are these companies are going to be allowed to engage with, public data, given that what we've seen with other forms of data, how, they have been abused. Other forms of data has been abused. And I think when it comes to, like you said, this bio advertising, bio e-commerce, which is going to be a thing. I mean, you saw it on, Batman. Which one?
Right, with the barcodes in the lips, some in the neck.
Yeah, you saw that.
Right.
I think
some on the wrist.
Right. Yeah, you saw that, and I think that's what's to come down the line as well on Batman Beyond. Yeah, one of my favorite Batman inceptions. But I think for me personally, lawmakers and what kickbacks and what programs are going to get kind of special privileges, because even though they've put a lot of stipulations on many advertising, aggressive marketing campaigns, and as we've still seen, a lot of them get special privileges to quote unquote harass consumers, harass citizens, and also moving forward, even with the likes of 23andMe. To be honest with you, I think 23andMe just sets the precedent, of what is to come. But for me, I think, regulations is more of an issue for me.
I think people don't realize that we are also past the point of stopping these things for them to come into fruition. First of all, most of these ideas and this technology has already been created. We even got, deep thought technology where computers and technologies and AI, basically AI, is able to progress on their own to learn how humans learn. We also already have DNA collected by, companies like 23andMe. And some people say, well, I feel more safe with the traditional medical field. But remember, it was the traditional medical field that did take Henrietta Lacks' DNA without her permission. And because they did it that way, the family actually can still sue and gain a lot of money. What 23andMe did was actually brilliant. If people didn't read the paperwork and they just signed off, that's on them.
Yeah, there was a clause in there.
They said it's a possibility. That's what they said. It wasn't like some of the other companies that staunchly said no. Right. Even though they may try to pivot, later on, maybe with an update. But 23andMe clearly stated that it's a possibility that your data will be used, but for now, we're not. But they still left it open, so no one can sue them if their DNA is used, and nobody can actually try to really go after the company. Because it's interesting thing is no one really is talking about 23andMe except for the science world and people who are active in reading on this information on a constant basis. Another thing too, I actually want your perspective on this. And I know you're going to go into something else after I ask you this, but wouldn't you think Andrew Yang would actually be the appropriate president of this particular day and age, let's say after Donald Trump, whether he wins his re-election or, if he don't and we get someone like Andrew Yang, do you think he fits more of the time with automation and all this other stuff that we face?
Absolutely. I think Andrew Yang, and again, this is not me necessarily endorsing any particular candidate. This is something that, we're just, discussing, qualities of particularly Mr. Yang. I think Yang is actually the first politician, even though I understand Buttigieg's age range is closer to the millennial, age mindset or whatever the case may be. But I think Andrew Yang is the first political candidate to understand the crypto technology. I think he also has an understanding of even, places for situations like a 23andMe. So I think, in this current state, I think he is definitely one of the more relevant-minded candidates, and he's not kind of stuck in a grand old hierarchy like, let's say, an Elizabeth Warren, right? Believe it or not, I think Donald Trump, in the sense of business, and he's not a brilliant businessman like some people have espoused him to be, but I do believe within his advisor cabinet, in the sense of business, I think he would give spaces like 23andMe a chance to breathe, whereas you might get a little bit of the browbeating from the likes of an Elizabeth Warren or some of these other ones.
Well, the wrong type of browbeating too. I think Donald Trump is wrong for it because he'll let everything go. And the reason why, and this is not endorsing Andrew Yang, but he's the best fit because he understands it. So he could be like with 23andMe or any of these data collecting companies. This is fine, but this is where the line is drawn. These are the policies where people, certain things can't be accessed from people. They can't be contacted for crimes, and he would, like, on the federal level there would have to be respect for the human population within the U.S. citizens.
Yeah, and my thing is about Trump and Warren, and actually many of the rest of the candidates. I don't know about Buttigieg. It just seems like even though he's closer to the youth, he just appears to be bought off already.
Well,
you know what I mean?
they're all bought off. And in fact, I mean, Buttigieg is definitely bought off.
Yeah, and then the thing about Warren and Trump, they're
very old.
They're too old and
not being ageist, guys, but it's just the truth.
Yeah, they're just out of touch with a lot of things, right?
They don't understand the automation world, even though, like you said, Trump is for business, though. Yeah,
and even though, let's say, if Trump were to, let's say, allow for systems like 23andMe to breathe, right? Unfortunately, he would allow for other things to take place as well.
Yeah, he'll take anything. The automative trucks, AI and all this.
Because he speaks
anything goes.
Yeah, he speaks for the CEO and the Fortune 500, and definitely in the wrong sense. I also want to go to something real quick. On TheVerge.com, definitely one of our favorite websites here. But it says here, one thing to highlight: 23andMe already shared genetic data with pharmaceutical companies, and this is what I want to really kind of touch on. I really think this is more of the pharmaceutical industry jumping more aggressively into the digital age at this point, and definitely moving into an aspect of AI, transhumanism, and cybernetics.
Right, because they've been doing it. Well, the cybernetics have been getting them in trouble because people who have volunteered for some of these experiments has backfired. Remember, some people, explosions and different things like that. But for decades now, pharmaceutical companies have been definitely branching out in every field you just mentioned.
Yeah, and also to continue on here from this article, I just wanted to highlight this point. GlaxoSmithKline, which looks like it's a trio of names here, has the exclusive right to use its data for drug development and purchased a $300 million stake in the company in 2018. But those drug companies use the company's data to create their own drugs. In this case, 23andMe identified a drug candidate and conducted animal studies on the drug internally before selling it. The Spanish company Almirall will take the product through human trials. So I think
say that last part again. Through human trials.
Yeah, and I think something
that's a very important part.
It is. Like, don't get me wrong, like, Sin and I, like, we definitely are for the advancement of technology, but see, the thing is, it's even the way that the whole time people have been donating, their information. Of course, people want to know their ancestry. Identity is very important to the human psychology. If we don't have it, a lot of us are, laden with a lot of dysfunctionality. So that's why I see a lot of people eager, especially a lot of us black folks. We're eager to, do this, that, and that. But I find it interesting, like, the whole time, though, there was like a double veil approach, because the whole time they were developing drugs or synthesizing basically medicine and things of that nature off of the human genomes that they were receiving from the population.
Well, yeah, I mean, people don't even know that one of the leading areas in our country on the data collection of DNA is in Alabama. Good old Alabama. Huntsville,
Alabama, turn on that Kid Rock music and let's get going.
People try to may assume, New York, different things like that. Don't get me wrong, New York, financial hub, cryptocurrencies and stuff like that. But actually, if people pay attention to the United States, period, a lot of the new technology is being created in places like Colorado, Alabama.
Actually, it's really wherever heavy military presence is.
Military, and also lower population to some extent in some places, because they need to be able to experiment. Like when it comes to the automated vehicles that are out,
right?
They need space to make sure that it's a less likely chance of a vehicle accident, and those the areas that they prefer. If you think about it, even if they were in New York, they wouldn't be in New York City. A lot of that is integrated once they're completely confident in the technology. Exactly. But again, if you're talking about finances, the crypto technology, blockchain, and other spaces where the blockchain is being challenged by new technology, of course, you definitely have those, of course, in the cities.
You're right about that. And here's another thing about it too, like, being in Texas, I mean, there was things I was finding out. There's so many things that are even stationed out of Texas. So like if you go to Austin, for instance, some of the most deadly viruses are held in the laboratories of Austin. In fact, when I was there, I actually heard a lot of these science lectures I used to pay attention to, and there were certain scientists that were actually having confliction with how Austin was storing, like, it's like level 3 viruses in like a level 1 laboratory, right? And they were even saying like it's basically the cause for human error, even with the advancement of technology, or even storing the likes of viruses for cures that may happen. Like if you had the outbreak of the Ebola or SARS or whatever the case may be, they were talking about how there was like this malpractice of storing, these viruses, and even proliferating into technology, how even though we're shooting for the stars, the possibility of the common theme of human error in the executionary phase may be a problem. So even when we're kind of thinking about 23andMe and how right now they're setting the precedence, because you brought up something earlier, how these other companies, they were like, no, we're not going to do this because it's, we're keeping it in. But also at the same time, we got to be real. It was like it's marketing, because people, when they send the information and the company's like, no, we're never going to do it. They're like, okay, well, I'll send my information. Whereas now, because 23andMe sets a precedent, and then not only that, let's keep in mind about some of the contracts that they're going to be able to secure from Big Pharma. Yes, of course, other companies are going to kind of change their position on things, but also one of the things that, may already come up that I've seen with some people is that, again, going back to human error about the storing of people's data, the storing of the information, and what could possibly open for mistakes and things of that nature, even, possible scandals or, stuff like that. I'm not saying that's the case with 23andMe, but within execution, everything is different in practice long term.
Well, and I think the scope of people's imagination, some people think it's like a Big Bang Theory, like all this stuff just came out of nowhere. Mm-mm. But you've had some people who, even some celebrities or artists, I should say, as well, that have been put on this game even in the early 90s and freaked out. I mean, Jamiroquai, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. People forget that Virtual Insanity was basically him talking about the digital age and his fear of the digital age. And he's quite interested because even though he has a great interest in science fiction and technology and somewhat of a love for it, he's also a mixture of a classical liberal. So he has issues with probably a lot of the things that he saw. Like one of the things that, if people, remember the lyrics to Virtual Insanity, he even talked about, now every mother can choose the color of her child. That's not nature's way. But didn't that also go into the biotechnology that we're talking about too? And also DNA, where we already, before, people were already changing, the higher ups. I mean, people with the money have already been, playing with their children a little bit when it comes to some of the biotechnology that has been confirmed to already be safe that decades ago.
I mean, and brilliant artists like you said, and I even think, okay, here's my thing about people like that, and also Prince. Was another one that used to keep this in his music all the time. Even if you want to, go back to, his Controversy album. But, a lot of these men and women, they're consumers of science fiction. And if you're talking about one like a Brave New World with Aldous Huxley, he had a different approach. Aldous Huxley wasn't like George Orwell, where he was like warning everybody. Aldous Huxley was kind of like, I'm putting a blueprint out. This is what we're doing, right? His brother, though, was even more bold and audacious, where he's like, no, like, this is what's happening, and you all are not stopping it regardless. And now Aldous and his brother, and even George Orwell, these are people that were kind of ingratiated into the higher up elitist society, like Carol Quigley as well, like you're saying, with some of these people. And then you have your musicians, like you mentioned, the aforementioned. These people are consumers of that type of, those types of literature. And when you start to see it be carried out, even when he dropped his single, Virtual Insanity, in the 90s, keep in mind, people were freaked out at the concept of test tube babies.
Right.
You know, that was another arc point
and
for
cloning. Remember, cloning was a big debate in the 90s.
Dottie the sheep. Remember that?
Right.
That stupid sheep.
Right.
Like
Right.
bad one, bad.
Right. I think people forget a lot of this stuff already. That
Right.
The technology we have out right now is not even 10 years far advanced what they have yet to put out. It's like over 100 years.
In many regards, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, because some people say, well, 2020 is boring. I would like some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, this is my theory of why they haven't put it out yet, even though you see China and some other places already integrating a lot of these things, like through surveillance, through facial recognition technology. I think for the U.S., they understand that we're a diverse group. We're not a homogenous society. That's number one. Number two, we also still have other generations, even though they've been, believe it or not, the baby boomers, the younger ones that are still around, and Gen Xers, and they've been able to quickly actually become accustomed to their mobile phones and other new technology that's come out. But I'm perceiving that maybe they want to launch this, possibly, this is a theory, maybe with the Gen Zers in the group of generation right after the Gen Zers that are completely in love with technology. In fact, that's why, just backing it up a little bit, when we was talking about Andrew Yang, he is an older millennial, I believe, right? Or a very young Gen Xer.
Yeah, I think he's a very young Gen Xer.
So he's very knowledgeable about technology.
Well researched.
And I'm not talking about, also to make it very clear, I'm not talking about Gen Xers as a whole. There's a difference between customers and the other Gen Xers who actually created this technology. Because people have to remember they're young baby boomers and Gen Xers who actually have created this technology. And then, of course, we have the second wave where you have these older millennials and younger millennials that have started up these new tech companies.
Right.
Which is like, I don't know, one could say the second or third wave. Mm-hmm. But getting back to the point, though, and maybe they're betting on a generation that may not have as much of a kickback, because even with Andrew Yang, he's not saying stopping it. If you go look back, like you said with George, he said, I want to stop it. If you go to classical liberals at that time, they're like, we got to stop all of this. This is not a future you want. I mean, think about the cruelty that can be put upon the public when you have the government and also private companies having this amount of power, even though George is actually right to an extent,
right?
Because that's very well could be true. And if people who are not on the winning side of the ticket, let's just be blunt, that actually is true. But a generation that's reading A Brave New World, like my cousin's reading that's what they've gotten the Gen Zers accustomed to. They are more in the mindset that they think they can compete in that market, probably. And they're also more accustomed to liking the idea of technology and just completely going into technology for everyday life. In fact, I think when you see them have to engage without technology, they actually get very annoyed and bored.
Yeah, okay, so I know when I went through high school, they had us to read A Brave New World. We had to write papers on a 12-page essay and, break down were we pro or against. I think, here's my thing, even, with people like us and people coming after us, like you mentioned with your cousins and everything. The thing is, though, is that with each generational approach, remember now the generational phase of aging of technology is much quicker than, us as humans. I think the prettier they make the technology, I think the sexier they make the technology, the less resistance you get from people our ages and up, even with them. Like the generation that's, I would even say, kind of coming after the Gen Zers. We already have babies that when they fall out the womb, boom, they landing right on an iPad, it's just been there for them. They don't know nothing. It's like us with the television. There was never a time that we didn't have the TV around us as a generation. And even to some extent, even with computers, with some millennials and of course many Gen Zers.
But what I will say is,
what about the job factor? What do you think about that? Do you think for Gen Xers, again, not the people know, we know Gen Xers have been a part of creating this technology, but what do you think about other generations outside of millennials and Gen Zers, how they feel about the job market with new technology?
Okay, well, I think even just to finish the point up real quickly, and it's going to tie into what you're asking with that question, is I think, to be honest with you, once the kind of like the fanaticism has died down, the end of the world scenarios have died down, I think adjustment and adaptability will be the forefront of the culture, because in essence, you're going to have to survive. I think naturally, we're all on some level, we feel uneasiness. Like it's like Sin and I engage with our technology every day, and there's things that spin in the back of our minds when we see an ad, or if we just get through talking about puppies, an ad shows up on the screen for puppies. Like you have your freak out moments, but at the end of the day, it's like they say, it's a necessary evil, but also it's a privileged asset as well. It's one of the same depending on who you are. But as far as the jobs go, again, I think for those people who are unwilling to learn, and I think if you tend to be like stagnant, in a certain space, mentally, skill wise, yes, it's going to be a bigger hurdle for you in that regard. It really is. Like, and then I guess one could say, well, Prince, you're speaking from privilege because, you got youth, you and Sin, this is what y'all do, da da da. But believe it or not, there are even a lot of us in our space, not like a whole half of the generation, but there is a lot of us who they don't want to have to learn none of the new technology except just to be able to use it for entertainment and communication. Right.
Older millennials are the last group that actually had life that, where there was somewhat of, outside of technology, a space outside of technology. Of course, hacking culture was big in the 90s. It was also big in the 80s. We was very involved with the new computers that came out in the 90s and game consoles and stuff like that. But we still had to have dinner with our mom and dad, or even if you had a single parent, we still had to do all these things.
Go outside and play.
Go outside and play, right?
Playgrounds was a staple in our culture.
But something just clicked in my head.
Yeah.
That now I know why the higher ups are not implementing the technology now, and that also connects to the job market, which is why they're trying to get the guns. China is number one homogenous, and they are under the rule of law by the police and their military.
Xi Jinping.
Even people fight back, they get smacked back quickly. We saw even when the Beijing Olympics, how the government said you have to move from your property that they paid for and they own, and those who refused, they got thrown in prison, and many also were killed. In the United States, because all the guns that we have out here, they're just afraid that there's still an energy of resilience where a civil war could possibly be sparked. And I think the deep state really doesn't want to deal with that. The only way that they'll even entertain force is if a certain amount of guns were taken off the market at an acceptable rate for them, where they feel like, well, if this won't be bloody, we can actually put a lid on dissenting opinions and bodies out there that would get physical. You could get physical, but if you don't have assault rifles and stuff like that, we can handle you. Even if we decide not to kill you, we can still handle you better than a society that have assault rifles and all these type of guns that out. So I think that's why the Democrats have been so heavy on the guns laws, and the Republicans have not been as forceful as people think. I think they technically are working together to really get guns off the street. And maybe they don't know the real reason why. To correction, because I know all of them are not insiders to the deep state, but their agenda is there maybe for that reason.
If you read memorandums and documents on you know, what the Rand Corporation is about. I mean, literally a statue sitting in front of the Rand Corporation is a gun with the nozzle twisted in on itself.
Right.
You know, and you all can do your history on the Rand Corporation, and you can kind of see where this particular type of talk has come from, whether it's not in the United States by way of the left, or if we're talking about what went on in South London or what goes on in the UK as well, because it's all of the part of the same faction, especially dealing with the Brits. But I think for me personally, from, you know, the things I've read about, and it's weird saying to read about stuff like 10 and 15 years ago. Yeah, you consumed it, and I'll tell you how my mind worked. Like, I wasn't reading this stuff like I just want to know everything and I just want to be smart. I was actually reading it like it was like science fiction to me. You know, when you read things pertaining, you know, the patent of, you know, the AIDS virus, or what went on with HIV, or how they plan to implement this thing called transhumanism, and how they wanted to make which is essentially what we are, make us kind of like, in a sense, de facto cyborgs, you know. And if you understand what a cyborg is, you know, it's an aspect of where technology enhances the humanoid's ability, right? And that's essentially what we are when we walk around with our cell phones, and we have our Apple Watches on. We're plugged into the VR reality things of that nature. So for me, it wasn't just like, you know, conspiracy. It was very fascinating for me personally.
Right, and that's what Elon Musk is for. That's what the Civil War is about. He doesn't want complete artificial intelligence. He wants what you stated with, you know, enhancements for humans. He wants, at the end of the day, the human consciousness to be in control, not a possible consciousness that develops within artificial intelligence.
Right, but and what's funny about it is that Elon Musk, you know, is still on the transhumanism train. You see what I'm saying?
Right. It's still transhumanism, right?
Yeah, so it's like, you know, but anyway, the point is that, because like when you read about this stuff, and then later on, like you kind of see things here and there, and you hear, you know, rambling people online screaming into microphones about, yeah, no, this is 1984. But then when you kind of start like really paying attention to how they roll out technology, and how, like, for instance, like for me, I've had very interesting conversations with individuals growing up. Like in San Antonio has a huge military base. If you're in Denver, you're going to run into very interesting people if you're a young kid, young boy, or whatever. And I was nosy. I always asked questions. If I saw someone with a strange patch on their shoulder, I didn't care, you know, who they were. I would ask them what was the patch and what it is that you do. And, you know, many of them have said, you know, well, one of the reasons why, you know, you see so many like updates with the iPhone or the Samsung or the laptops or whatever the case may be, is because it's a slow rollout of technology that, you know, that's been sitting on possibly 60 years. And I kid you not, in some cases, that's 200 years that has been oppressed or repressed by their control. And when I say that, I mean all of those particular types of industries, military industrial complex, political industrial complex as well, that decide to roll these things out and embed in contracts. Now, what's interesting, like even right now, like some of the things Sin was bringing up about the advancement of technology, it's more of a proliferation of technology. It's like turning on the faucet, then cutting it off. And that's
right, because the United States is actually a very volatile country, and the people in power knows that. They are very careful because they feel like one wrong move too far to the left or right can set off a landmine. Right,
and that's where it's like when we see this thing called, even going back to this 23andMe, you see like the whole time they were developing this, you know, these drugs, this medication, but like for us, like when we see new technology, to us, in the books, it's called, what they deemed it, and this is an official terminology, they call it junk technology. So the optical illusion for us is that, oh, you know, this is advanced technology, when really it's kind of like you're handing out candy. Right, with the trans situation.
Right, I mean, we've already had men who transitioned to women in the 80s that looked like a woman.
Right, exactly.
And you know, people think, oh, only now some of the, and this is paraphrasing, so I don't want people crying, but paraphrasing, some of them like, oh, now they actually look like women. Like I can't tell the difference. But actually, for those who had the money, there were someone, you know, paid for them to have it done. There were some even in the 80s that looked exactly like a woman. And then also, here's the weird thing with people and how media is so important. People who claim to even be anti-trans, when they watch Carbon, it was a Carbon Copy? Or
it's Carbon Copy.
Yeah, when they watch Carbon Copy, they think the sleeve thing is cool. And I think they don't comprehend that when you go into a sleeve, you can go to a male or female sleeve.
Transracial, transsexual,
and
transhumanism.
Elon Musk is actually okay with that.
Yeah.
And then two, gender is the first thing to be attacked because I think personally for them, they feel through sex, through gender, those type of things, attraction, all that is the way to start, because race is still taboo. You know, you saw even how black people laughed at racial Dolezal.
Yes.
And even, you know, other groups who a black person who feel like they're white. People don't know that for those who think, oh, white people are going to always be a system of racism, actually that's not true. And some people don't like to hear this, but they're all about the brain. They're still implementing race tactics now, but after they really complete the gender dilemma with trans rights and stuff like that, once they get past that phase and that phase of that taboo and completely, you get at least 80% of people that's for it instead of 50 or 40 or 30.
Right.
Then that's when you're going to slowly see the campaign begin that we're all from Africa, even though technically we are. And that what is race really when it is really a social construct? So if I'm a white male and I want to be a black woman, why can I not be that? Or if I'm a black man, why can I not be a white man or a Chinese man? Why can't I change those phenotypes? So what's your thoughts on that, Prince?
Yeah, you know, no, that's just that is pretty much what it is in essence. I mean, even in some of these write-up, you know, literature, you know, not even just with, you know, humanoids. This also ties it to green technology. Pay attention. Green technology is a part of it too.
Right.
Because at some point in time, they want to marry nature with then the unnatural in the sense of the buildings and the bricks. Like they're already having experiments dealing with organic buildings, buildings that are grown. Like I kid you not. Like if we
St. Paul, I think they've already started something like that, right?
Right. If you can't really wrap your head around just the whole transhumanist, transracial, transsexual talk that has been out there for a long time, like Sin has stated, it's been out there. Like even if you talk about in the space of Hollywood, you know, celebrities were already quote unquote up on game about a lot of things that they were privileged to. I mean, Charlton Heston talked about how he was taken to certain spaces because, you know, many people within government liked his energy. And he said he saw things that questioned his belief in the type of God he thought he had espoused himself to be.
And can you break down the three type of writers in that space too? Because we know there's the ones who get to see it and they write it.
Right.
They saw behind the scenes. There's the ones that was given the script, and then there are the ones that just gave a great educated guess, great imagination that hit home. So can you talk about the three? Because since you're already in that territory.
Yeah, because you have like, okay, if you think about somebody like Carol Quigley, Carol Quigley was more of a documentarian, right? You know, chronicler, he's kind of in the same space as Aldous Huxley, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have those individuals where, let's say a Stephen King, you know, he does his own research, but he just happens to hit things on the head, right? I mean, you can even hear about the conspiracies surrounding Stephen King and his unfortunate accident in the book The Green Mile, along with the movie. The movie in itself was about, quote unquote, Jesus Christ. That's really what it was about. And then you have those other people that it was suspected, even with likes of particularly the Wachowskis with The Matrix, that maybe the Pentagon may have had their hand in giving the script. Now, I'm not saying that's a fact, but this is something that had been put out there. I know everybody's talking about the Sophia situation. That could be one aspect of it, but it has been noted that the Pentagon around that time, around 99, 2000, right a little bit before 9/11 and aggressively after 9/11, that the Pentagon was really handing out scripts for certain types of predictive programs to be detailed on the silver screen. So yeah, like you said, those 3 types of writers have existed, and I'm sure some people may, point out some other different angles, but we do know for a fact that even in the space of Hollywood, sci-fi, that's what I was saying earlier, sci-fi does play a role in predictive programming, even leading up to 23andMe, because I guarantee you, if you go back into the 90s or the 80s, there may be films by Richard Donner, there may be films by Steven Spielberg that touched on this very subject right here. James Cameron touched on it as well. So, it's weird in a sense that it kind of goes back to the whole situation that there is an elite class, and there clearly is like a direction to go in.
So do you think Hollywood being in the forefront, do you think all of them are just mindless dummy liberals? And again, this is paraphrasing a segment of the U.S. population, what they feel about some of these Hollywood elites. Or are they completely in step because they agree with the things that they saw? Maybe do you think, like, what's the percentage actually, do you think, actually know about transhumanism and they've seen things, and this is why they're so for certain policies versus those who are just, following suit with policies or with companies and whatnot, just because they just want their money?
I'll be honest with you. I know what it looks like from quote unquote the bottom class, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful manner, but it's okay. I'll just say it's the outside class for some of those people. They're like, hey man, I ain't no bottom class. I make money, right? But you can still make money if you're in the outside class. But I think for them, and for many of us, we just feel like everybody's a part of it. But when you really kind of get in certain spaces, it's like history, it's like, some people may know about Hannibal, some people may know about Carthage, a lot of people probably don't, right? I think many people within those spaces, because of how effective compartmentalization has been as a social and career hierarchy in our society and how effective it is, I would guesstimate probably more than half don't really know. And I think many of them are kind of driven by this social promotion class status. Like if you take a guy, you say this part of the wing is what you're going to be working on within making cell phones, right? And then you go to the security factor of the guy, and those guys may be working on backdoor programs that the Pentagon can use to get into those phones and do whatever they want with monitoring or whatever the case may be. I think conceptually a lot of people are not aware of it, but what's weird about it, I think because a lot of people are not aware of it, many of those people that we talked about, like you said, about those writers that have been led into those spaces, or they know about those spaces, or they're just a part of those class and they just feel like putting it down in the books. They put so many things down in these books. Like, Cass Sunstein wrote a very interesting book called Population. And I mean, when you read it, I'm not trying to be funny. Like, it is some very creepy stuff. But
let me rephrase that. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this. The book is out there, though, and it's not like many people are really rushing to those things. And I'm not just saying his book specifically, but what I am saying, there's a library of literature that is pretty much out there that I don't think is as promoted as much, or people look into it as much. And if they did, they'll kind of see like, oh, okay, I kind of see why a lot of things are happening.
Maybe a better way to ask is,
okay,
do you think they actually read that literature? Let's say for the ones like you write, the ones that aren't, and maybe you get more directors in and more script writers in,
okay,
like maybe a Spielberg or something like that. But for the rest of them, could they possibly be reading those source materials?
Oh, yeah. No. Okay, let me tell you where the people who actually read it, and when I say the outside class, I was just talking about the regular 9-to-5er and maybe those people who actually make a little bit more money, right? But believe it or not, though, it's the intellectual academia class that is very aware of a lot of this stuff. And many of them have kind of made a choice in a way to be a part of councils that are the deciding factor of how things are implemented to the public, or how people are regulated, whether we're talking about water control, if we're talking about green energy, if we're talking about urban renewal programs, if we're talking about redistricting or whatever plays into the case of organizing population. And I will say, like, let's say if you go to University of Austin, I've been to a couple of their seminars where whatever your take is on depopulation, I'm just making a statement here, but I have been to seminars where I've seen professors and undergraduates, make speeches and give out their thesis and their op-ed pieces about, why they feel that, half of the population should be removed for the safety of the planet. And that career class, that intellectual academia class will stand up and clap. So I think the classism plays into that space with a certain mindset of the intellectuals that usually are behind some of these organizations that kind of rule over the public in that space.
Yeah, see, my guess too would actually be, it's like, we know the country is usually 50-50 on things, but you'll get some outline policy and stuff where you will have 80%. If I can't imagine Hollywood being organically 95% one way without policies and stipulations and people murmuring. It's kind of like if you're at a job, right? And you have one way of thinking, but who's paying you in that system is completely a different way, another way of thinking. So you have to adhere to that. And sometimes I would even say most of the time you have people that would submit to that. They would submit to that structure. And then you have a few of them, even though they're submitting to it at the workplace, they still have their point of views that they murmur, in their home and maybe even on social media. But I do think there's a system in place that I think the average person doesn't comprehend, which is why Hollywood is that way. You have some actors and actresses that come from Missouri and places, conservative homes and all that, and they've been in Hollywood for 5 years and they start talking a whole a different language.
Because compartmentalizing, or better yet, coupling with that specific intellectual academia class, because there is another side of that intellectual class that they're not necessarily for any of this stuff, and they're trying to come up with proactive ways to counter possible agencies, institutions becoming highly corruptible when they're given spaces like 23andMe, right? And I'm not saying 23andMe is something that it's going to take place in that nature, but like what you said about Hollywood, here's a real problem with all of this. Well, the real issue is that not only with some of this literature that's out, but there's also a cult that's generated. It's like what you said. You may get somebody that's from Bucktooth, Mississippi, and then, they get in a few films, they start schmoozing around with the Jolies and all of these folks, and then all of a sudden they're espousing the deep populist approach.
Right, because when, like in the book of Eli, when information is important, whoever had the Bible, or at that time, the word of God, was the one that had the power. Right. Anytime you give people information that they don't know about, be it factual or a folklore or, an ideology or whatever, they do become very entranced with you. It's like even something as mundane as just having a better lifestyle. I saw one thing, it was a long time ago when I was a teenager. It was a clip of this white boy who was a farm boy, and he got into the space where he got picked up for a modeling agency. Now, before he got picked up, I assume he would think that his wife was attractive. She was pregnant. I think they already had one child. But when he got into that life with all these supermodels, and he was getting, quite a amount of money and recognition in that space, she came to visit him, and he was ashamed that she came and visit. He felt like embarrassed by her presence.
Yeah, I got you.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I think that's because, again, that's why I was, speaking earlier about all of this plays into the classism that goes along with it too, because at the end of the day, now, whether you're for 23andMe, I think, the fact that you may have some useful technology with being able to find, advanced preventative care. I mean, it'd be beautiful when people can, diagnose certain diseases 10 years in advance, or even at birth when, the baby's born is brilliant. But I think on the other side of the game with this technology, and even with this cult that kind of comes along with it, I think classism does play into it. Like, one thing you'll find out, like if you visit places like Austin, many of those people who consider themselves morally righteous, and they're usually far left leaning, they have a religious mindset, even though they claim to be like, I don't believe in, Christianity, this, that, but they do have a religious mindset about depopulation.
Is it split?
Yeah.
Is it split? Is it them being nefarious and gaming people, or is it split personality, or a type of psychosis where in that moment they really believe that they're for the people, they're for climate change, or for this or for
it's
that?
Actually, them believing depopulation is better for humans. They and the reason why I bring that up, because I've had people try to argue with me about it, and I really didn't care to debate them, because Sin knows me, I'm not really a big pointless debater. I'm not even certain subject I'm interested in. I'll hear somebody's point, but I'm not gonna really sit up there and debate you all day. But it kind of one thing you would have to highlight to them is the flow of the populations in America from the 1950s up until now, where people had moved in the inner cities because of job opportunities. Right, we was moving away from farming and an agriculture culture, and now we was going into the the industrialized age of build, work. So that's why everybody's packed up in these cities like this, right? Sin and I, we drove all over this country, and you'll see there's literally nobody there. But when you're telling it to someone who has sat there and they've consumed Bill Maher-ish type depopulation material, or they consumed about, oh yeah, well, we should have the ability to determine who lives or not. How can they do that though, and then turn around, speak to the mindset of how they can do that, but then turn around and say they're for the people of Flint, Michigan, or they're for saving population? Cognitive dissonance. I mean, that's really what it is. It's cognitive dissonance. Do you believe in the MK Ultra theory, that some people say that some of these celebrities are hypnotized to be assets of illusion? Because, I mean, do you think even an actor or musician mind can be more, let's just say, open to that because of the way their mind work, especially an actor or actress, when their whole life is wanting to be able to tell other people's stories and other people's mindsets, coming through their body so they can portray different characters? Well, I mean, yes, I do think it exists, and I think even in its mildest form, it's like what we said when someone comes into new information. Like, how is it that someone can come from Gumtown, Desktop, Missouri, and they go into a space and remember repeated programming from not only, let's say, media, but then their constituents, where one guy say, hey man, this is what I think and you should too. Well, really, this is what I think and you keep getting that programming. And if you study exactly what hypnosis is not just simply somebody waving something in your face and you're out of it. Hypnosis, in many times, it's very mild, and actually the mildest form of hypnosis is the most effective. Repetition too, right? Yeah, because you can build on it. So I think that, and our ability as humans to have cognitive dissonance, I think that plays into it as well. And then also we can will and have ourselves to believe that we're serving the better men of humanity when it comes to these things. Do you think it's a gumbo? You got some people at the lower level, they're just doing it for money and fame or money or both. That's their level. That's good enough for them. Do you think there's a hierarchy of why each person in Hollywood does it? Absolutely. I mean, Jay-Z at one time said he didn't believe that racism was an issue or that it no longer exists in America. So do you think he's one of the celebrities too that is privy to this transhumanism technology and future that a lot of the deep state and the higher ups have in mind? I can't see why not. I disregard the fact that he's a black man from Marcy Projects in Brooklyn. In fact, if Aaron Rooser, director of Trading Places, was able to be pulled in, Jay-Z has netted 4 or 5 times his wealth and his cultural influence. And let's not forget, many of these people in power, even people over, giant conglomerates, let's say like a 23andMe, not saying it's them specifically, but other institutions within that space, they may be attracted to the personnel of a Jay-Z, the personnel of a Michael Jackson or a Whitney Houston. One thing I always want people to understand is at a certain point, you really have to take skin color out of the room once you've ascended to a certain space. I know for us, in our everyday transaction of normalized prejudice, bigotry, and racism, it's hard for us to get around that. But no, literally, like if you are in a prestige space and you have generated high notoriety of yourself, there's things you do get approached about and too. So yeah, when it comes to Jay-Z, a Beyonce, a Rihanna, even with her billionaire Rihanna, I'm sure there's things she's already seen that's just not necessarily privileged to the general public.
How can that future be a possibility? Even with Star Trek, how can that be a possibility when religion is still one of the deadly 3 in society? People think of politics, bankers, which is who's commerce, economy, and all that. The bankers, and they also include politics, religion, and bankers. So religion being one of the 3 that people think of in present time and in past tense. How can transhumanism and all these other things that they want to have scientifically happen when Christianity, the Muslim faith and Jewish faith and all these other faiths are still very heavy and dominant in societies across the globe?
I think time, that previous generation, if we're talking about older Gen Xers, I think they're the last real hard wave of it, but baby boomers, as they continue to transition on or out of power within society. And then also millennials and Gen Zers. Millennials and Gen Zers' perception of religion is completely different, actually. And in fact, there's a hybrid approach too. I think people should pay attention to the model of Joel Osteen. I think Joel Osteen, the way he's even able to disseminate quote unquote Christianity or his form of it, I think it's going to be very important to understand that moving forward, that's going to be the angle, because there's this non-judgmental approach, the way he does it, that was traditional, or that was not traditional with the previous inception of it, with the Billy Grahams and the T.D. Jakes and the Eddie Longs and Creflo Dollars. You kind of get a fire and brimstone sermon with them, where Joel Osteen's approach is whimsical, it's a bit magical, and also I would even pay attention to what Toll Eckhart was able to implement within the culture beyond black and white, with also someone like Oprah as well, and her mindset of spirituality. I think actually,
right, that's a great point, because Oprah doesn't seem like a traditional Christian to me. It's almost as if it's maybe a
Warriors of the Light,
somewhat cover. Yeah, because she may think that people aren't ready for the type of spiritual belief she has, almost similar to Jay-Z.
Yeah, actually, if you really think about it, like Joel Osteen, Jay-Z, like I said about Toll Eckhart,
even Kanye's in that space too.
Kanye, the other book, The Secret. I'm just being honest with you. Like when you ask about that,
I laugh because I think about every time someone mentions The Secret, I think about Dave Chappelle. But go ahead.
But that is, I think what millennials are missing out on is that, in another way, we've been pulled into a form of religiosity, and that will be the manifest destiny, manifestation, prosperity gospel angle of it, but with a hyphen or an asterisk of spiritualist.
And isn't that also what they claim for the FOI?
Right.
With the Fruit of Islam, they feel that Scientology has been implemented. And also, what do you think of Scientology? Even though we've had it had its hype, but a lot of celebrities have now condemned it that used to be with it. So I don't know if it's
still the same, right?
Still have the clout that it had, even though they still have Tom Cruise, who's it seems like he will always be loyal to Scientology. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, and for those people who may not understand, or maybe a little bit confused, is like there was this rumor that Scientology and Farrakhan, Nation of Islam, somehow there was this pact that was taking place behind the scenes, although nothing has been conclusively proven other than a few breakaway from certain camps that said, Dianetics is being practiced here and there.
And Farrakhan seems like outside when he's talking to his pupil, when he engaged with other groups of people, with Eminem, with Kanye West stuff, he seems to be beyond race. It's almost as if maybe he's been privy on the transhumanism information as well.
Well, that's what I said. I would actually pay attention in a sense of spirituality, more of that space of religion. And I think, to be honest with you, a great template for them would be a Joel Osteen to Oprah to Jay-Z. Remember now, even in many of these religious texts, one thing that's highlighted in all of them is that when you're saying God, it's not necessarily specific. Who's God? What kind of God? What is his or her properties, right? You have women online that feel God is a woman. You have men online that feel God is a woman. You have men online that have their perception of it. But what I will say is this: when you go back to Farrakhan, what you're saying is, I think one of the reasons why Farrakhan tends to be beyond a lot of things is his legacy too as well. And I think because we're in such a snapshot culture, one thing that is still supremely valued is a type of legacy like a Oprah Winfrey, like a Farrakhan, but also it's still the worshiping of celebrity. It's still the deity in the space, but it's still what profits can be used at the hands of the state as well.
What do you think? How do you think a classical liberal from the 20th century would, react to this stuff or even, just in any other time before the 21st century? What do you think, or how do you think they would react to being able to see this technology, whether it was a Martin Luther King or even a Mark Twain, or even JFK, Robert? How do you think they would say if they were privy to see at this stage how everything's moved forward with this technology?
I think naturally, because so much for them would be in the space of the unknown, I would only imagine that one or two things could happen, or it could happen at the same time, would be amazement and fear, or both. I would look at it like, one of my favorite films, Brandon Fraser's Blast from the Past. So
you feel they were more freak out? All right, a different question, slightly different. Let's say these people weren't assassinated, or Mark Twain, because he was able to live long enough to this. We know that's impossible, right. But at this stage, but let's say he was allowed to live this long, and they went through the process of getting to this point and being able to see the technology. Do you think they would abandon some of their beliefs, or do you think they would fight harder?
I think they could and probably would fight harder. I think many of them, because of the brilliance of their minds, I think they would simply adapt their message differently, adapt it more in a unique fashion. My personal opinion is this: classical liberal, libertarian, or if you consider yourself anarchist, I think whatever your message is, and you find yourself running into a brick wall where you think, I may have to abandon it completely because the technology is just where it is, I think it's simply because of lack of imagination and not really manipulating the technology. Because I don't feel you should have to abandon any of your positions, but like I said earlier, you are going to have to adapt. You are going to have to learn. There are things you're going to have to weaponize in your area if you're truly concerned about getting your message to a particular class of people.
At its core, the Western world still believes in the tree of good and evil. Mm-hmm. Do you think society, there could be a split where some people feel more knowledge the better. Executing, it doesn't matter what some people feel the consequences can be. We want to see if this can be done. Do you think there's a split in that mindset that some people feel, well, if you bite from the tree, from the knowledge and execute, that's a bad thing? And then there's a part of society that feels, no, the more information, the more data, the more, the better.
Absolutely. We're seeing that right now. You know, those who create the technology, of course, you know, they want more. They like, you know, they're like, man, please, everybody bite off of this. Bite off the apple, right?
Right. I actually got into a conspiracy that may be dumb, but I'm going to bring it up later. But go ahead. I want you to finish your point before I bring it up.
Well, yeah. And then, of course, you're going to have the naysayers. Like, even though you and I, we're covering 23andMe, and because I know of our influence that other people in certain spaces with maybe larger platforms who happen to look like us may start talking about it a little more as well. I think you're going to have those people who are the moralists, and they're going to say this shouldn't be, this, that, and the third. So there's always going to be that fight. It's no different than what your parent does. You know, like you don't need to see this because they've already experienced it. Let me tell you what you shouldn't experience. And I think that's going to always be the case. But I think people like you and I, we have more of a pragmatic approach.
Do you think Steve Jobs and also the higher ups behind Apple was giving a middle finger to the Bible by literally their logo being a apple bitten into, and saying that Eve actually did the right thing by biting into the apple and engaging with the tree of knowledge?
It's a possibility.
I know it's out there for some people.
That's a good conspiracy. That's a good conspiracy. Well, you know, you and I, we talked though, and I told you my perception of that whole concept, that story was like, it was weird, because I said, if you think about it, like Eve went to go seek knowledge. The first thing she does is bring it back to her man. He bites into it and he's like, oh, I didn't know this, right? And then all of a sudden they're punished. Because think about it, like Adam and Eve didn't even get a chance to really act on anything. They didn't get a chance to act on the knowledge. They were just immediately punished, right? So
you think Apple, for them and their perspective, they feel what Eve did was the right thing, and that it could be a possibility. Again, all this is just us conspiracy time. Conspiracy. But do you think, you know, even with some of these other companies, because it's like, also a shout out to Omar, all of these logos mean something very intimate to the creator of it, not the regular workers that, you know, they come in, they don't know what the intention was of the person that created the logo outside of the structure of the technology. They know that, or the brand. Yes. But, you know, not all the time they don't know why a particular logo was created and what the intention was, again, outside of functionality.
Well, I think you're talking about like iconography, you're talking about symbolism, right? You're talking about strong, meaningful symbols. You know, if you're talking about, of course, the classic one everybody brings up is Nike, with the swish, having to do with Mercury. You have, like we talked about with Apple. I mean, yeah, these things work because this has been a part of human history for a long time.
And people felt that Steve Jobs was such an asshole. Like, I really could see him thinking about that. Like, being someone who was, you know, that came from Syria. I think he was adopted as well. Someone with that background, someone who probably was introduced to religion at a young age. I could see someone like him being like, well, I'm going to have this logo for that particular. Again, we can't confirm this. I'm just saying I can see him doing something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at you can look at Paramount, you can look at Warner Brothers, you can look at so many different ones. Comcast, you can look at AT&T, US West. You can look at a lot of different companies, and believe it or not, what's funny, this is okay. So this is what's I always found ironic. You have this aspect of people who denounce religion, denounce spirituality, right? Because even in religion, even though many of them, you know, still speak on the Holy Spirit or the Spirit or whoever, but when they see the spirit world of the occult or the hidden, they're quickly put off by it.
When the information is put out there, but they're drawn to it when, there's no Alex Jones or anybody out there. They are actually drawn to it because why is a certain class drawn to Apple and Apple products? The people who are really minimalist, some of them may be spirit. They have spirituality, but they don't go to the church or they don't go to their mosque or anything like that. So there's a certain type of culture that's been attracted to that logo, and maybe it's because that's what the logo was created for that type of, attraction.
Well, yeah, that too. And you have those people who are a part of religion and the spiritual world, the spiritual realm and the occult. It does put them off, but like you said, they are intrigued, even if they're just being nosy on the sly, or they're looking just like, well, who threw up what symbol and what. But what's funny though, when you get into the higher end of the business world and politics, a lot of times some of these people are not making moves until they consult astrologists. They're not making moves until they consult their spiritual advisors.
Some of them think that's science too. I mean, talk about the split that you think for the blue bloods and that deep state. How many of them do you think are traditionalists, where they really believe in God and Jesus? And how many of them do you think, even when they're talking about laws of attraction stuff, they think of coloring, and they all think of that, the color red and zodiac and all that, they all think that's science. What percentage would you think make up that class if you was to guess?
I think all of the ones who are very successful, I would easily say 90%.
Which one, traditionalists or the other way? Per science.
Well, I think for them, the spirit world is a science. Okay, all right, let's look at entertainment, since everybody likes to run to entertainment. They recently, Drake and Future, both Scorpios. In fact, me and Future's birthday is one day apart, right? His is the 20th, mine's is the 21st of November, right? I think Drake's is on October 25th. Now, both of them, and I just want to go somewhere with this. Both of them are very successful in their space, right? When it comes to spirituality, and if you want to talk about laws of attraction or astrology or whatever the pecking order of your spirit diameter is, obviously these two guys are aware of something, because they chose to drop their particular video and song on, I believe it was called The Cancer Moon, right? Which was a full moon, right? It was I think it's the first full moon. Oh, no, it was a partial lunar eclipse. Okay. It was. That's what it was. And then on the other side of the game, Meg Thee Stallion and Normani. Now there was a twin energy thing going on there, right? The other time I've seen this was when Kanye West and Jay-Z dropped the oldest track, and then the same day on the flip side, Nas and Common dropped the Ghetto Dreams joint, right? And the only reason I'm putting out there, either people within their camp or them specifically felt those particular days that they dropped those things on was more of a power resonance for them.
So you feel like the majority of the higher ups, even past the level of those people you're talking about, you think it's a combination still for them at this time, a combination of both traditionalist ideas mixed in with science?
Absolutely, because it hasn't changed since the days of Kemet. Here's what's interesting: all those people that are pro-Kemites, but they're like anti some of the stuff we've seen in politics, spiritually, and even in entertainment, which is entrapment anyway. All of that stuff usually originates out of Africa. In some ways, of course, people from their current times in populations and societies add their own flip on it, but at the crux, the skeletal phase of it, originates out of Africa. Astrology,
astronomy, mathematics, all of it. Even the heraldics that everybody prays when you see the lion, when you see the Moors and stuff like that. Of course, that's all out of Africa. In fact, many of the average white person that engage in racism, that are very mentally regressive and stupid, none of them understand that a lot of the things that you've seen in Europe has been because of the knowledge from Africa, from the Moors, and then of course what they've learned, they kept going with the ball, from there. And many of them understand too that we're all from the continent of Africa. And I know for of course there's people who are more direct than others, like you and I, being two black individuals, we're probably over 70% Saharan African, and proud of that. But of course you'll have people who are way far removed from that, even though far long centuries ago they had an ancestor or ancestors that came out of Africa, and then eventually what took place in adaptation to environment and all that. Eventually they don't understand that the blue bloods lay claim to that already. Many of them have African artifacts in their homes. The royals have a lot of artifacts from Moors, Moorish literature, paintings, murals, and so much important information that they are very knowledgeable of what Africa is capable of and what Africa brought to the whole globe. But is the average person that has no clue.
Well, okay, here's the thing that I kind of want to put out there, and I know some people may say, "You be a womanist," but this is what I feel, right? People forget that the original oracle, of course, it went by another name in Africa, or the original soothsayers, the sightseers, were black women.
Right.
Is it a coincidence? And I'm just kind of going off this. Let me preference this before I go. I can't think of the film, but the film was showing a bunch of people dancing. It was into the crumping movement in what was taking place in the early 2000s, right? The crumping movement that went on in Los Angeles, California.
Right, the crumping and the clown.
Right.
Dance, right.
So these inner city black kids who arguably felt they had a detachment from their African brothers and sisters were shown a video of tribes in Africa doing the same exact dance as them. And it blew their mind. They said, wait a minute, what? Even Ryan Coogler talked about it. He had never been to Africa. He said, but when he went there, he said the same thing men and women were doing in South Central, even kind of how they were hanging out and braiding hair and things of that nature. He says they were doing in Africa. He said it freaked him out.
Right, like you have some black Americans say our swag is uniquely our own. No one, I mean, like, the banjo, musical instrument.
Yeah.
That a lot of black Americans were crooning on. That was an instrument that was created in Cameroon. Some people say Congo, but I think it was Cameroon in Africa. A lot of the things that black Americans espouse that they think is just new is actually stems from the continent of Africa. That, don't get me wrong, they built upon.
Right. Of course they put their own twist on it.
They built upon it, but it was still origin of Africa. So it's like, you shouldn't be listening to certain black leaders. And for other audience who don't know, I'm not going to get into it because it's none of your business, but for my black audience who are on the line, you shouldn't be listening to people who are happy about being 50% European trying to tell you to be anti the continent of Africa. Is just stupid.
Well, here's my thing about it. Like, I do believe in spiritual resonance. If you want to call it epigenetics, fine. It's a fancy, terminology of, things that are, passed down in the bloodline. But okay, if we go back to Africa and, we take about the early deities that, the early deities of fertility, you saw obviously a black woman with large hips and large breasts and large derriere, a big ass, basically, right? But also we know that in many of early forms of African tradition and even spirituality, that the women were seen as the ones with the gift of sight, right? Only in European lore there was like this wrestling of making the man the Merlin.
Eventually, because early Europe was more Afro-Asiatic. Early Europe, the women were,
of course, early
Turkey when they find the artifacts and stuff like. But then, of course, quickly it's like
it's a man club at a certain point. But what I was going to say, like even with us, like, given that that's what was going on with many African women, like a lot of people don't even us as black Americans, we don't even take into consideration of just how many black women are just by default naturally interested in astrology.
Well, it's,
you know what I'm
you're
saying?
right. It's like even when you talk about women in general, but yeah, we're going to keep it on black women because you're like, we ain't talking about women in general.
Yeah.
You a segment of our audience, but before you even continue with that point, it's interesting how, you know, women in general are the sparks of life. Even if you're, what was it? The algorithm.
Right.
The origin of that algorithm came actually from a woman.
Right.
A woman
It
in
did.
Europe.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how a woman may invent something, but after that invention has come into light, it's dominated actually by men. And we already know men invent. So some people want to start crying, but men invent too. Yes. But the difference is 9 times out of 10, when a woman make an invention in science or in any field, even in cooking, you know, the male is dominant as a chef. The male is dominant in all forms of science and technology. So, you know, can you add that in? Also get to that point after you finish your first thoughts.
Well, yeah, I find it interesting because and I'm not speaking like for all white women, but I've seen white women interested in astrology, and there are some that they will not make a move without it. But it's just, I think it's something interesting where the astrology talk and looking for the gift of sight
is really big with black women. Absolutely.
It's huge with black women. And even if we want to talk about the seeing eye aspect, because from what I've understood, the black woman was the original eye seer.
Absolutely.
You know? Right. And I know some guys, but what about the Eye of Horus? But people, you check out the folklore in itself. The woman had a lot to do with a lot of things, but I want to just, I'll deal with that another time. I'll definitely check mark that because I know some guys are going to freak out. But think about it like this. The invention of the GPS was by a black woman.
Yes.
There seems to be this thing with black women that it's guidance in their invention. It's guidance, where to go. Henrietta Lacks, where to go with biohacking.
Right.
The GPS system, where to go in that space. The algorithm, where to go with that. What I am saying is, like, I think it's very, even though like we like black men, we have a natural prestige and resonance. We do have a very natural energy. Like, it destabilizes the room when it comes to there.
It's about appreciation. I don't like gender and sexism BS when it comes to intelligence, because that's like a woman trying to negate what the Moors brought in of innovation, invention, so many things that they brought into the globe with thought and knowledge.
Yeah, and that's something that, like, from what I've seen, black women tend to be in the resonance of sight and guidance.
Right.
And I know some fellas may be flipped about that, but it's not really the case, because even if you want to look at, you know, the likes of Perseus, you know, one of my favorite mythologies, and of course, you know, one of my favorite films is the original Clash of the Titans, not the remake with homeboy that played in Terminator Salvation, although I think he's an okay action actor. But the original one with Perseus, for him to even find his way, there was two qualities of femininity that he needed to conquer or needed to meet with. One was he had to go to the oracles, where you saw the three women sharing the eye. They were sharing the one eye, and they were telling him of the things to come. They said, Perseus, prepare yourself, right? Then he had to go and behead Medusa so he can dominate the Kraken, right? And the kind of like the Kraken was like this, it was a very perverted form, a monstrous form of like patriarchal dominance and enslavement of a people that they wanted to get rid of, because he requested the sacrificial energy of a virgin. That's why he would come out to sea all the time. And those some people may be like, what are you talking about? But go look at the film. It has a lot to do there. Perseus also kept getting guidance. I can't think of the other goddess that was helping him along the way. But what I am saying is, like, what I definitely don't like about the imbalance of our society is that there is a discounting factor of guidance and sight that women by large have contributed to society, not even just through motherhood, but through science and technology as well.
Right, and
I think
all fields. I mean, one of the things for you that you've been able to really capture people correctly is you have the sight from your mother. Your mother is a person who is very skilled with calling people in their inner spirit and who they are, and you have that same type of a gift as well, although your comedy also comes from your mother. But like, this is the thing that males, some of them, I'm not talking about all males, but this is something that males is regressive about, and even some females who, you know, are very anti-male.
Right.
The thing that I don't like about people is just because you're a male, you didn't get all that gift from all men.
Right.
Most men who are chefs get that gift. A lot of them have gotten that gift from their mother. So why would you exclude another woman from having the chance to be a chef? You, for example, your comedy comes from your mother, right?
Yeah, it does.
But your success, let's say you had a successful career as a stand-up comedian, they will put that to the accolades of just all men. Like, oh, look at the history of black men who are great comedians, which there a lot of them are. But then you discard the fact that many of them had that genetic gift from their mothers. It's kind of like if a woman who was a great swordsman and she was just a feminist and, you know, trying to prove her point against men, and she like, look at me, but you got that gift genetically from your dad because your dad was a great swordsman. And it's like, how many of these mathematicians or these guys out here that also are getting in the way of women advancement or black women advancement, so on and so forth? How many of these people have gotten that gift for their mom only to become people to discard that particular gender?
I think, you know, it's a lot of brilliant writers. I know some of y'all like, man, y'all done got off, but trust me, this is going to be in the title of the podcast as well. So y'all can chill out like, yo, man, what happened to 23andMe? But we kind of breaking off into that too, because we also know, speaking of genome,
she's a woman that headed the 23andMe company. Right.
Yeah, and that too, that, you know, black women have all of the genetic chromosome of human history.
Right.
The only species walking this planet have all of the genetic chromosomes of human history. That's why.
Say it again.
Like, I'll be honest with you, Sin, and I'm proposing this for our next podcast, that we have to highlight something when it comes to the prestige, prominence, dominance of what black women are and who they are, and what does it mean for them to be where they are at this point. I think that should be like our next podcast. We'll do some special cook up on it, and we're going to talk about the spiritual, genetic, and scientific aspect of it. That's what I really think, because I'm actually, okay, I'm not going to mention no names, but like when there was like a wave of like this real hatred of black women, I know some guys, they be like, they're fascinated with black women. And I think sometimes it's on like a cute level. It's like sometimes it's a sexual level.
Well, it's just like some physical guys who are insecure about masculinity overly just talk about women and degrade men. Right. Then you have the crop that because of the insecurity of masculinity, overly trying to talk about their dominance and completely just disrespect black women, you know. And I mean, and then you have, of course, those people with common sense and understand that genetically you are a makeup of both your father and your mother, and there's going to be special skills that you gain as a male from your mom and from your dad, just like as a woman there's special skills you gained from your father and from your mother.
Yeah, it is, and it's not even like to be cute, but I think it's scary when, you know, by way of another group, you can be brainwashed into trying to exterminate one of the more powerful life forces that has ever walked this planet, you know. And I think black men are one of the most powerful life forces as well. But I find it very interesting, even just the chronicling of black women, whether we're talking about deities dealing with fertility to what scientists have also proven. Why would you think groups with highlight fertility within the transfusion of DNA from generation to next generation. Then here comes scientists saying, well, black women have all of this genetic chromosomes that no other group has. We find that very uniquely
no
interesting.
other group of women have that because black women are the original women.
Yeah, so I think even with that, the fact that scientists is now coming back behind and checking off the list of what the Dogon put out, the Kemites, or even early Babylon had put out as well. Even when I was talking about with the seers, the soothsayers, and things of that nature. I think that's why for me, I didn't really care about, playing the dominance game with black feminine energy, because I understood who I am. I just don't like disrespect from anybody. I don't care who you are. But at the same time, though, the fact that, again, you're launching off of, like, if we really think about this new era of biohacking, transhumanism. Okay, so we're in this space, and I'll speak more expansively, right? Where it is kind of going off of, what was mentioned with the likes of the age of, the Aquarius energy and all of this other type of stuff and things of that nature. But there is this larger presence. There is this larger presence of feminine energy, right? So if we're talking about feminine energy, black feminine energy pertaining to Henrietta Lacks when it comes to biohacking, which is largely a lot of this, technology is based on, her genetics. And then, what you brought up earlier about a woman having to do with algorithm, which is the driving center force of this culture. And then if you're talking about GPS systems that had a lot to do with the creation by way of black feminine energy. It's kind of weird right now how even the blue bloods are also pushing another type of overt femininity or feminism in the space. If you're talking about transgender effect as well, it's all weird. It's like a weird gumbo that's happening at once.
Because the deep state perceives the regular populace just like the kings and queens perceive the regular people that worked for them as dumb, as uncouth, people who don't have the knowledge, people who don't know what's going on.
Right.
So that means at the end of the day, all the people who are wasting their time with sexism and racism and all these other isms, at the end of the day, transhumanism is around the corner. And all the people who wasted their energy of all these things didn't try to figure out, at the very least, to fight against what if you're really against what the deep state and the blue bloods all about, then you will have the right type of fight, which is not going on because many of the people, average person, don't know and don't understand. And then if you're for what the blue bloods are, and if you're for it, you probably wouldn't be wasting your time. To be honest with you, you probably wouldn't be wasting your time with the isms.
I think it's I just think there's no understanding of it, right? And I know I'll be fair to some people. There's a lot of things that just like you having bizarre, freakish campaigns that's put on the public that they don't have an understanding of, and they're getting reprimanded for not being able to be educated about either. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is, like you said, it's like you're concerned with the presence of feminine energy when a large part of it, with even this inception of where we are with our digital age in biohacking and transhumanism, has to do with feminine energy. It's a weird situation that I think that's hurt this country, because we've seen even in JLA, Justice League of America, real quick, and I know you got something to say before we kind of close out here, but remember the alien invaders that came in, and his wife kept giving him advice, but he was ignoring it. Like, and every time all of his things was failing and failing and failing.
Like when we went to the Black Shrine of Madonna, and his wife was giving him really good advice, and he just kept ignoring it, which is why he hasn't had a success either. But I just want to say I love you, Prince Solomon.
What?
Those who are new to Thought Crimes, Prince Solomon is my husband, and I go by the name of Sincere for the new listeners. And also, you can subscribe to us and our show on YouTube. You can also follow us on iTunes, follow us on Spotify, follow us on Google Play. We'll be on Google Play soon. You can also follow us on Instagram. You know, we put videos and shorts and animations up on Instagram. You can follow us on Twitter. Twitter is a little bit more serious. We follow people in business, people in government, people in tech, you know, economy, animators, you know, all the things that interest us that we like to dissect. So that's what we follow on Twitter. So if you want to see us share those things, you can follow us on Twitter. And then also remember Podbean as well, because this is where we have our exclusive live streams on Podbean. And we also going to start having not only exclusive Podbean episodes, Podbean podcasts that, you know, if you pay $1, you'll be able to listen to. But we will also have free live streams as well on Podbean, because we want to really use that feature more where you'll be able to call in as well. But we want to use that feature more because we want to just be more loose and more engaging with y'all versus YouTube live streams. Not saying we're cutting out YouTube altogether with the live streams,
you know, because we have fun with those,
right? But we're just saying that if you really want a more expansive view on our thoughts and the information that we want to give to y'all, you will go definitely follow us on Podbean, because some people forget to click that follow button. But follow us on Podbean so you can definitely check out those live streams. And also want to give a shout out to the Think Tank.
Let's get ready to rumble! Perhaps you shouldn't turn your back on me. Is that a challenge?
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
Black folks are nosy. They have specials. Nosy specials. Why does a bee make honey? You ain't a bee. Why do you give a fuck?
Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
If he dies, he dies.